Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to be standing between the next session, which is the cocktail. It's the cocktail that I'm seeing. And I'll try as much as possible not to take too much of your time. I've prepared a speech that would go for like 2 hours, such that we can all find a balance. And typically, if I'm sitting in my country, you would take me for a politician because, I'm dressed the way they dress. So when I'm asked to talk about government, civil society relationship, I said to myself, okay, it's a tricky area. And my thoughts will be defined by questions. Some would be hypothetical, some would be just to introspect. But also is to say that we are in a terrain where we need to really, really think deep as to whether we want a relationship with government. And that we need to ask ourselves, as African and European civil society organizations, whether we are ready to really engage with local authorities. Having said that is to also say that people define government and people define civil society, and that our temperament defines what relationship we get and what outcomes we're able to really deliver. And there are a couple of stereotypes that we now need to work around. In some climes, you probably would not listen to a state-owned media because for all of us, it's government machinery for propaganda. Whereas in our various organizations, we have newsletters. Can our communications officers criticize us in our own newsletters? But how do you know about an organization or institution? It is by being interested in them. And how do you get interested in them? It's by ensuring that you subscribe to their means of communication. But when we have stereotyped those media as government-owned media, how do we get to know them? Again, we need to think through how we define this engagement and whether we are truly ready to engage with government. Of course, we must also understand that our relationship sometimes, we've not been able to make it a whole of government approach. Sometimes we engage with the executives, sometimes with the legislature, but oftentimes the trend is that we leave the judiciary behind. And at some point, I will speak to these as we discuss issues around civic space and how we also view regulation as a sector. Because some of these things defines how we actually engage with government, and it defines our relationship. Of course, we must also think through how, as a relationship with government, what investments, because relationships are investments. There's the asset, there's the liability, and also there is the income, in quote. How do we marry all of this in the kind of work that we do? Government engagement is an art and comes with huge level of investment, plus also it has this level of agility that you must have, a level of institutional memory that you must keep, and one that is long-term. It is not project-based. It is not program-based. It's long-term. And we have to find structures that can help us to keep this relationship going. Of course, within two trends that I'm seeing in the course of the work that I do, either confrontational or collaborative. Whereas collaborative NGOs are easily labeled as being sold. Whereas those that are confrontational are those that donors are also happy to provide some level of support to. We have to balance this. And we have to allow civil society to choose whatever strategy works for them, whether to be confrontational or to be collaborative. But when I was taking over as executive director of the Nigerian Network of NGOs, I said to myself, how best can I get policies around nonprofit operations reviewed? Should we be confrontational? Of course, there are roles for being confrontational, but we need to find that balance between collaboration and also being confrontational. It then speaks to how do we give feedback. Every one of us in the room were in the senior management level. Would you agree? For someone in the low management level to stand up and provide feedback in ways that you would not appreciate, what would be your immediate reaction? Relationship is about empathy. It's about putting yourself in the shoes of others, right? And then finding ways to balance that. Can we as civil society think through how we actually engage with government? Okay? Then thinking that, so when we talk about civic space, is it only civil society organizations that are affected by civic space? There's a need for us to think through the typologies of civic space. How does it affect the political class? How does it affect civil society? How does it affect the private sector? That is when we can be balanced. For instance, there's a growing trend of hate on politicians that are going on online. And this is tricky for political participation and expression. And this is an area where civil society can come up to ensure that citizens understand the need for them to be civil, plus also respecting community standards without muffling their expression. Then, taking that further, is the need to think through, if we would be in a relationship, how do we co-create within a culture of mutual trust, respecting each other? And how do civil society itself sees regulation? I mean, I was just coming from a meeting, the session to this, where we were talking about how regulation has helped the NGO system to be more better than local NGOs. Watch it. An operational environment that enables the activities of non-profits rather than disable their activities. And you can only get this within a culture of mutual respect, where we both understand each other's dynamics and we work at addressing the concerns that we all have jointly. And this speaks to the need for us to have that ability to be able to co-create. Today on the internet, we've got a lot of problematic content on social media platforms. And social media platforms determine the kind of relationship we have online when we talk about digital civic space. And when you link this to your ability to express, to assemble, and also to associate. However, the problem that we see on social media platforms happens to be drummed mainly by government. Of course, government have also not been successful in communicating the challenges very well. But we now need to step up and find ways of listening to each other in ways that ensures that the Twitters, the Facebooks, and Instagram are not toxic. But they are spaces that are safe for women, safe for children, safe for citizens to also express their concerns about their government and provide feedback. And this will define the relationship that we have going forward. Because there are spaces for us to quickly tell government how we feel without having to use the post or the snail mail. And we need to think through this within how citizens communicate with government and how government communicates with citizens. It's also the ability of civil society themselves to be able to form this partnership or go into this relationship. And that's why I started at the outset or the onset of this conversation. Are we really ready? Are we really ready to engage government? Is the donor community ready to support meaningful government engagement? And the model is the open government partnership. I remember speaking to a donor in Nigeria and trying to tell them how we need to work on a protest toolkit together with government under the OGP banner. And the donor said to me, "You're trying to do government's work." Then I said to myself, do you see the government developing a protest toolkit? Do you see them? So why are you telling me I'm doing government's work? we need to face that reality. A relationship can't be confrontational. It will lead to divorce. It has to be collaborative, it has to be participatory. And we need to start thinking along that line in the way we do things. And of course, conversations have also moved from the non-partisan nature of our work as civil society and the need for some to cross from activism to politics. There has to be that balance, and that should happen. But when it is happening, it must be within a culture, of course, that respects all of the principles associated with that. Again, I'd mentioned how relationships are defined by temperaments, and the temperament of our sector as a whole is that of antagonizing and not organizing. And like the late Tajuddin Abdurrahim would say, start organizing, stop antagonizing. And that takes me to my next thought around how you step into the shoes of government, empathy, and you use that to couch the narrative. Note, I have not said do not hold government accountable. And I often joke to say that the best time you can hear the truth about yourself is when you are in a fight with your partner. When things are fine, on a lovely date, we're all cool. Until there's a fight. That's when he or she will tell you how your nose is as long as that of... But your ability to be able to listen at that point also becomes critical. Many times government have told us how, as a sector, non-profit abuse is happening. Of course, there's the narrative also around terrorism financing and countering of terrorism financing. There hasn't been much evidence, but these are concerns that are on the table that we need to sit with government and discuss. Addressing these concerns in ways that enables the operations of non-profits. Who profits from confrontation? That's one big question we want to ask ourselves. And how do we encourage citizens to provide feedback in ways that are civil and in ways that are collaborative? Of course, when they need to confront government, it is said peaceful what? Protests. Right? Because we all don't want violence, is it? Again, is civil society ready and honest enough to engage with a critical sector of society, which is government? Are we ready to go into that kind of relationship where, as civil society, we would even doubt ourselves? Like I said, it's a tricky way, it's a tricky thing to engage with government, especially the way civil society itself sees engagement. And this takes me to an example of the report released by Carnegie, where Carnegie had looked at the Nigerian network of NGOs because of its name and lumped it among civil society organizations that are not credible. What was Carnegie's reason? It was because they've not seen us confront government. And that's a global organization that has defined the Nigerian network of NGOs as fake civil society. Of course, we responded and they pulled down that report. And the beauty of that for me is the ability of a Southern NGO to punch holes in a well-funded research and to provide evidence from a strategic plan to our press releases to how we've condemned government spam on Twitter to how we've also engaged government. And it only took us 2 hours to respond. And that was our pride. But when you look at that kind of report and you balance it with the narrative of you engaging with government, then are we truly ready for a relationship or engagement with local authorities? We then need to look at that hypocrisy that I mentioned and balance it with whether or not confrontation is the way to go. Of course, note, balancing the narrative or balancing cooperation and collaboration is very key. And civil society must maintain its independence. However, are we again ready? I've asked this question about 5 times today here. Are we ready for that relationship? And that relationship, for me, would have to be in the areas of policy and legislation. The second would be around justice system, in ways that we can have a relationship with the justice system in ways that ensure citizens' rights can be respected. The third would then move to support services and empowerment for victims that may have been affected by issues around civic space or rights not being respected, issues around development challenges and all of those bits. Now we need to look at technology. That is how we communicate. That's an enabler for relationships. But we have problematic content online. Issues of artificial intelligence was mentioned yesterday. And we need to start looking at these in ways that respect our rights. We need to also get into conversations around privacy and how we balance this with surveillance, respect for movement, respect for human rights defenders, and citizens themselves. As civil society, we enjoy public trust a lot. How would we ensure that that relationship continues to help us to inspire public trust in the work that we do, and that citizens continue to trust us as the voice for those issues that concern them? Of course, we now need to start looking at the economic impact of nonprofits, and this will determine our relationship. Governments understand the economic impact of international NGOs. That's why when they come into our country, government pays attention. Whereas as local NGOs, we've got individual giving running into millions of dollars, if not billions, but we've not been able to use that as a way of sitting with government and negotiating a fair relationship that would make us be able to sit at the table just like the private sector. Before now, the private sector is the private sector. But in my country, the private sector now puts the word organized private sector. So when they're talking, they'll tell you we are the organized, what? Private sector. And that's why it's easy for government to focus on the private sector when we had COVID, and to neglect a sector that is very much important to oiling the wheels of our communities. So I was impressed when we sent a letter to government of Nigeria and asked them to ensure that they provide funding support to nonprofits. Of course, they did provide that support as part of their support to the private sector. We must now find that balance between how we protect our sector and how we engage with government in reality. And I think nonprofit research has to now be deepened, especially looking at our economic impact. The volunteer time that comes into our sector, how do we monetize that in ways that let government respect our sector, including the catalytic effect that the grant dollars we receive brings to our economy. Now, having said that, is to also now say in closing that civil society itself must be humble. Humble to understand that we do not have all the answers, and it is time for us to learn how to listen. And I'll set an example. While we were developing the Sustainable Development Goals, about 6-7 of us African civil society organizations, of course, paid for by donor money, flew to New York. And we went to all of the offices and even to the desk of the person that will write the SDGs document, and said to them, we're just here to listen to you. That was our disarming strategy. And that strategy helped us in being able to review the SDGs document, provide context, provide better language, and helps us to be able to advocate more properly. Again, are we ready for that relationship? I thank you.
Thank you very much.